Picture your mind at the exact moment you were born. Completely blank. No data, no prejudices, literally zero pre-installed knowledge. Just pure, unadulterated potential. Now, in our modern, hyper-connected world, we try to fill that blank slate by throwing endless streams of raw data at it, right? We memorize facts, we pass tests, and we call it an education. But what if this purely data-driven system is fundamentally broken? What if it's leaving our minds dangerously incomplete? Well, welcome to today's explainer. We're diving into the mind of the brilliant 10th century philosopher Al-Farabi. He's famously known as the second teacher, and he constructed this profound, holistic blueprint for learning that doesn't just stuff your head with facts, but actually acts as a cure for the scattered mind of the modern student. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. The blank slate, theory versus habit, doctors of the soul, logic versus persuasion, and finally, the ultimate goal, true happiness. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the blank slate and human potential. So, to understand how we actually should be educated, we first have to understand what we're working with at the very beginning of our lives. Al-Farabi argues that your mind at birth is a total blank slate. In his words, bomboş. It possesses the potential to know, but it lacks any actual content. Think of a raw, unshaped block of bronze. I mean, sure, it has the potential to become a magnificent statue, but right now, it's just a heavy lump of metal. In the exact same way, the raw sensory data you take in every single day, the things you see, hear, and touch, they just sit unformed in your head until you actively sculpt them into actual knowledge. And here is exactly how that sculpting process works. Step 1, we gather raw sensory data. Step 2, we process it using our internal tools, so our imagination and our memory. But step 3 is where the real magic happens. To move from just having potential to possessing actual realized knowledge, Al-Farabi says we need what he calls the active intellect. He uses this beautiful, highly visual analogy for this. Imagine your mind is an eye. Even if your eye is perfectly healthy, it literally cannot see color in a pitch-black room. It needs a metaphysical sun to illuminate the room so the eye can actually see abstract truths. The active intellect is that sunlight. It is the absolute spark that turns your potential into profound understanding. Moving right along to Section 2, theory versus habit, and how we actually build character. Let's look at the stark contrast between merely learning facts and actually building your character. Farabi splits education into two very distinct halves. The first is ta'lim, or teaching. This is the acquisition of theoretical knowledge. It's what happens through speech, through reading, and through verbal explanation. Sound familiar? Yeah, this is where almost every modern school system stops. We sit in rows, we listen to a lecture, we acquire the theory, and we kind of just think we're done. We mistake the basic instruction of the mind for the completion of our education. But Farabi insists you absolutely must have the second half, terbiye or ta'dib. This translates to education and discipline. Terbiye isn't about what you hear, it's about what you do. It is the method of creating moral virtues and practical skills. And how do you achieve it? Through habituation and the relentless repetition of actions. You have to physically practice virtues over and over again until they become a deeply ingrained, completely stable part of who you are. So smash these two concepts together for a second. On one hand, we have ta'lim, speech and theory. On the other, terbiye, habit and repetition. If you are an ambitious student watching this right now, hear this loud and clear. Knowing something theoretically is completely, utterly useless without the daily repetition of moral habits. You can memorize the textbook definition of honesty for a test, but if you haven't habituated actually telling the truth in your daily life, you aren't actually educated. Your character hasn't been sculpted. Okay, Section 3, doctors of the soul. Now, if we have to build both the mind and the character, who is guiding us? Al-Farabi uses a really striking medical analogy here. We're so used to thinking of teachers as just information deliverers, but Farabi views the true educator as a moral physician. Just as a medical doctor treats your physical body, the teacher treats your soul. A sick soul is one that's completely distracted by excessive material desires, which produces ugly or harmful actions. The teacher's job is to prescribe the exact right discipline to cure that sickness, guiding you until your soul is healthy, meaning it naturally, almost effortlessly produces beautiful, virtuous actions. And in this process, there are two massive red flags, two extremes that a teacher's balanced discipline must help you avoid: excess and deficiency. Farabi warns that teachers themselves have to avoid these two extremes in their methods, too. If a teacher is way too harsh, They just cause the student to develop hatred and resistance. But if they're too soft, they completely lose their authority and the student loses respect for the truth. This perfectly brings us to the core of moral training, the middle way, or ortayol. Following the Aristotelian tradition, Al-Farabi defines true moral virtue as sitting perfectly balanced right in the middle of those two extremes. Think about courage for a second. Courage isn't an extreme. It is the perfect, healthy middle point between being entirely reckless on one end and being a total coward on the other. A healthy soul, guided by a doctor of the soul, lives entirely in this middle way. Section 4. Logic versus persuasion and adapting to our audiences. So far, we focused heavily on your internal development. Now, let's zoom out to the external world. Farabi realized early on that we all have different natural dispositions, or fitrat. Because of this, one single teaching method simply cannot fit everyone. It just doesn't work. For the intellectual elite capable of deep abstract thought, the method is Burhan, or demonstration, and that relies on strict logic and mathematical proof. For the intermediate audience, it's Cedel, which uses debate. But for the general public who might genuinely struggle with complex philosophy, the method is Ikna, or persuasion. Here, the tool isn't mathematical proof, it's imaginative, storytelling, symbols, and rhetoric. We really need to directly compare these two extremes, Burhan, which is logical certainty and hard evidence, against Hitabet, which is persuasion, emotion, and rhetoric. Honestly, understanding this distinction is your ultimate armor for navigating today's chaotic internet. Every single day, algorithms throw highly emotional stories and symbolic images at you for one reason: to persuade you, to make you angry, to make you click, to force you to take a side. That is Hitabet in action. Farabi would urge the modern student to develop their critical thinking so you can instantly recognize when you are being manipulated by emotional persuasion and instead demand the absolute logical certainty of Burhan. So how do you actually apply all of this? Well, here is your action plan based on Farabi's teachings. First, identify your natural preparedness. Study the fields you naturally align with, or those talents will literally fade away. Second, cultivate intellectual virtues like a razor-sharp memory and quick understanding. Third, commit to moral principles. And fourth, and this is absolutely crucial, internalize good deeds. Farabi describes the ideal student as being like water wearing away stone. It takes immense patience and persistent work until your education becomes your deeply internalized second nature, driven entirely by a genuine love for the good, not just because someone forced you to do it. Finally, Section 5. True happiness, our ultimate goal. Let's bring all these puzzle pieces together. What is the actual endgame of this intense process of theory and habit, of logic and moral discipline? Well, Al-Farabi calls it saadet, or happiness. But listen, he isn't talking about that fleeting feeling of dopamine you get from buying a new phone. No way. He defines true happiness as the absolute peak of human actualization. It is the state where your soul becomes an independent, fully actualized intellect, utterly free from petty material distractions. It's the exact moment that sculpted bronze statue is finally complete, and your mind perfectly connects with that metaphysical sunlight we talked about earlier. I want to leave you with this provocative thought. As we've seen on this incredible journey through Al-Farabi's philosophy, your mind starts as a blank slate with absolutely limitless potential. But potential just isn't enough. Theory isn't enough. Are your daily habits, your relentless repetitions, actually wearing away the stone to reveal the masterpiece inside? Are you just gathering raw data, or are you actively becoming a fully actualized human being? Take a really hard look at your daily habits today and decide what kind of statue you are going to sculpt.